This morning, we are diving into a new series. We're calling it The Politics of Jesus. And this will be one of those that provokes whatever it provokes. And I want to invite us to just have a posture of openness, because here's the deal. Politics are messy. Politics bring out the worst in us and the best in us sometimes at the same moment. Because sometimes when we're dealing with politics, the worst parts of us come out, but they're driven by the very best part of us. So we may feel compassion in an area, but as we feel that compassion, our passion overwhelms us, right? And we start saying things we'd never say in person on Facebook, and we start attacking, and we start going at it. And this is a hard deal. This is what it's like to live in a polarized, Facebook-driven society. It's a very challenging place to find ourselves. And what I'm going to suggest throughout this series this fall is that the politics of Jesus cut all the way through all of the mess, all of the noise, and invite us to a better way. Now, some of us in this room hear the politics of Jesus, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, I know that, right? Religious right, or whatever the expression might be. And that's not the politics of Jesus, and we're going to talk about why. And that's not to shame anyone for whom that might be your political leaning, because it's not even about political leanings. It's simply to say that whatever preconceived notion that we have in our brains about what Jesus-shaped politics look like, if they look more like a political party than a crucified revolutionary who overcame the grave that Rome put him in through resurrection, you have the wrong political script. That is the foundation. And of course, today's a hard day because it's 9/11, 15 years later, I believe. It's 9/11. I remember waking up early to go to football practice. We had a morning practice, if I remember correctly. And I remember waking up and my stepmom being in the living room and just blown away as she watched the footage over and over again of the Twin Towers. And I remember walking away and just kind of being dazed and kind of confused about what is this really? Did this happen here? Is this even possible? We're in the strongest country. We're in the best country, right? In that phase of my life, I didn't have categories for understanding exactly how big the shift would be after that moment. All of the lies of security through strength had been deconstructed. But interestingly enough, those were the same narratives that got propped up after 9/11 as the best response. Maybe you remember that we were going to go confront the enemy, defeat the enemy, and then we weren't even sure who the enemy was by the time we got into the mess because we were going to different countries, and it just got messy. And all the way through, Jesus' people said, we have to defend ourselves. We have to fight. And as that narrative continued, as a war continued, as culture continued to move on these questions, we started to notice something, that our impulse to fight was driven not by Jesus, but by our own sense that we had lost our own security, that we had lost our own safety, that we had lost something when those towers came down. And there is no denying that something, and in fact, someone and someones were lost on that day. But it did send us into a political tailspin, so to speak, because that was probably part of the initial tick up that, you add Facebook and MySpace and Twitter and all the things that would come a few years after that, and then the rhetoric starts to really get crazy. No longer does a newscast control the story that you have at your dining room table, but now, check this out, I had a conversation with someone in the other side of the country, and I told them how wrong they were. Let's talk about that this time at the dinner table, right? Everything starts to shift with 9/11 and social media kind of pushing us into a new day when we talk about politics. Now, I think we have another modern day example of this, Colin Kaepernick, right? Some of you didn't like this guy before he decided to do what he did. Some of you still don't really like the guy, but like what he did. Some of you hate what he did, right? And that's really not at issue here, but it's interesting. It was pointed out to me that it's a great symbol of the polarities in our country. That if you sit down during the flag salute, the Pledge of Allegiance, the Star-Spangled Banner, you are saying in that moment, because of the polarities our country has created, I hate soldiers, I hate anyone who has died for this country, I don't like America, I should probably move, I'm going to sit here to show everyone how much I don't like them, right? But if you stand, you are the only person, well, no, because there's a lot of standers, but you are the crew that loves this country, loves America, loves soldiers, right? It's interesting, though. There's been Jesus followers for generations who haven't stood during that. Because they said, for us, standing or pledging allegiance to something that isn't the way of Christ is idolatry. Now, there's nuance there, and different people have different ways they deal with that. But it's just interesting to me, and I started thinking about this a little bit, and I started thinking about what it's like, civil rights era. So I went and I watched Meet the Press with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and one of the commentators that was interviewing Dr. King said to him, don't you think these protests that you're doing and these marches are foolish? How are they going to change anything? And it did change some things, didn't it? Anytime we see a prophetic act that twists our kind of political bubble just a little bit, I think as Jesus people, we're invited to say, whoa, can I sit in the tension of how that makes me feel for a minute, rather than overreact, overextend? Now, is Dr. King's legacy carried out all the way where he wanted it to go? Absolutely not. That's why we have Black Lives Matter. That's why we have all the protests. That's why there's racial inequality in this country, right? This is still a problem. But had Dr. King not done the sort of actions that subverted the norm when he did, it is arguable that we wouldn't have at least ticked forward a little bit when it comes to racial injustice in this country. I am not saying Colin Kaepernick is Dr. King, just, when you come and rewatch this, right? I'm not trying to do that. I don't know Colin, whatever. My point is this. What political moments trigger you the most? And do they actually reveal something deeper within you about where some of your internal securities and allegiances actually lie? And if they do you judge them? Do you feel shame for them? Or do you say, God, here I am, and this is the mess of a human being I am, and that's me, by the way, and I just want to submit to you that these things are triggered in these political situations. Help me sort it all out. What does this teach me about me and how I understand the world? So the politics of Jesus are going to seek to do that. And what you're going to find is I am not a political party person. I'm not going to say, if you're a Republican, then blah, blah, blah. If you're a whatever party, right? That isn't the politics of Jesus. We don't just say, oh, they're pretty close to Jesus in some ways, so I'm going to endorse them. They're not there, here, or there. No. Jesus' way of politics are not compromised by compromise. Jesus' way of politics are always image of God reflecting. You know what I mean? It's always about God's beautiful kingdom that transcends the artificial borders of nations. And so, what I want to do today is kind of lighten the mood here just a little bit, because we started with whoa, this is going to be intense. Don't know if I want to come back to this church. This guy's crazy, right? So we're there, but I want to go back to the beginning of the story this morning. I want to talk about a world as God designed it. I want to talk about a world as it was meant to be. And if we can get our hearts and minds around the world as it ought to be, then our political imagination can be informed for something better. Okay, so that's where we're going this morning. You're going to hear me use this word shalom. Shalom. Can you all say that? Shalom. Shalom. I've been to Palestine, so I also know the Arabic. Say salam. Yeah, so this is a word that goes back in the tradition. It means peace, but it doesn't just mean peace. It means wholeness and restoration. It means the kind of harmonious relationships that are in the fabric of creation from the beginning. This, my friends, is a word we're going to use to describe God's good world as God wants it to be. This is what it says in Genesis chapter 1. You may have heard this. This is that creation kind of liturgy, narrative poem in chapter 1 of our Bibles. This is what it says. This is a New Revised Standard. It says, "Then God said, 'Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion,'" we're going to come back to that, "dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." And we're left wondering, I don't think I like the creeping things that creep upon that earth, right? But that's okay. That's probably why the devil's called the serpent or snake. And okay. So God creates a good world, and human beings are the pinnacle of this creation, but they are not the thing that you can abstract from creation and God's project be whole. A lot of times, Christians have in their heads that we are the only thing God actually cares about, and everything else in the created world is actually disposable. But in God's economy, when God says, "This is very good," it's after everything has been created. It's not after just humans show up on the scene. And now we're going to talk about what it means to be an image bearer, but in short, it means that you reflect something from the one who has given you that image. So if God is the one giving you an image, it means that you project the love, generosity, and kindness of God to everything around you. This is part of shalom keeping. Now, here's what's interesting. We have this word dominion in here, and dominion is one of those terms that's been used all over the Christian history, and it's one of those words that certain people groups hear it and say, evil. Native Americans, First Nations people in particular, when they hear dominion, they think this is evil. We can understand why. We'll unpack some of that. But one of the things that we have to recognize as we jump into politics from a Christian, Jesus-shaped perspective is that the way our country that we inhabit now starts and unfolds is driven by dominion in the wrong way. I'm going to call it dominion done badly this morning. Dominion done badly. And here's what's so interesting. A lot of us have heard this phrase, we just need to turn back to God as a nation so that one day we can return to our Christian roots. Here's the thing. Was killing natives the Christian roots that we're talking about? No. How about enslaving people from another continent, bring them over here, and then saying, we're going to create a slave system? When was that Christian, right? So when we talk about Christian roots of a country, we have to ask ourselves the honest question, what part of our roots are actually Christian? Deist? Maybe. Christian-ish? Sometimes. Christian? If you're a white man, maybe. Yeah. Right? Come on. Talking to myself. If you're a white dude, it's super Christian, but it's the wrong Christian. It's the Christian with the sword, right? Like that's the problem. So when we talk about dominion, we have to acknowledge dominion has been done badly. There's a preacher in the 1700s. His name's Cotton Mather. This is what he preached one day. He was preaching. He's a Puritan preacher, and he was preaching to soldiers who were fighting the native peoples who lived here. And it's a sermon that is titled "Soldiers Counseled and Comforted." This is 1689, and so this is what he says. We are the new Israel, and the natives are the Canaanites, just as Jehovah, that's God, Jehovah commanded Israel to slaughter the Canaanites, so God is calling us by divine right to take this land and to slaughter if necessary. That's dominion done badly. That's the roots of the story. Now, I don't want to talk as though all of American history is bad. All of the values that were here were bad. I just want to name the fact that the American impulse has often been the dominionist impulse. Impulse that says, God gave us dominion. Surely we're good Christians, so we know how to steward that well. So if we need to clear out territory, use human labor, whatever it takes to make this nation God's new nation, we've got to do it. And by the way, we're not going to go into it, but it was driven by apocalyptic fervor most of the time. That if we can just set up the right society, then God might come back. That worked very poorly, by the way, just in case you're wondering. So, dominion done badly is when we use a word like dominion and don't know its biblical ideal. Its biblical ideal is stewardship. Its biblical ideal is that we have been given dominion in the sense that we are to rule creation the way that God rules us. Not through coercion, not through violence, but through generosity, love, and relationship. And that's foundational to the problem in so many politics. We need some oil, so let's go kill people. That's dominion. There's people suffering, so let's go serve them. That's the way of Jesus. You see, the problem is that we don't often understand that what feels good to me in this moment and feels safe and secure is actually the insecurity of several more people in the world. And if my security means that others are insecure, I've got to ask the question, does that look like a God who came in the flesh to be crucified for the liberation of the insecure in our world? I don't think it does. And so, dominion done badly. We have an example of this week. First Nations people are protesting a pipeline. Did you hear about this? They're saying, the earth matters. Who thought, right? We're reading about how the earth matters, and we don't always acknowledge earth matters. And so they have said, no, you are invading our territory. We're the Sioux people, and this has been our place before the whole dominion thing. And they've said, no. And they've sent dogs on them, I hear. I mean, I hear it's been really bad, but I hear that it's been blocked recently. I don't know all the details of the story. But again, if we want to say, but we've progressed and we've gotten so much better at this non-dominion thing, this non-coercion thing, the reality is all we have to do is talk to a native person, a black person, an Iraqi person, and a Palestinian person, a person who sees drones in the sky that America is funding, and then we have to ask the question, maybe it only feels that way to certain people. This is a problem as followers in the way of Jesus. God's dream was that humanity would exist in proper relationships so that God's Shalom would be everywhere. And by the way, that's the end of the story for us. But it's also how the story starts. This is what N.T. Wright has to say in his book, Simply Christian, about the point of being an image bearer. This is such a great quote. Check this out. He says, in the early stories, the point was that the Creator loved the world he had made and wanted to look after it in the best possible way. To that end, he placed within his world a looking after creature, a creature who would demonstrate to the creation who he, the Creator, really was, and who would set to work developing the creation and making it flourish and fulfill its purpose. This looking after creature, or rather this family of creatures, the human race, would model and embody that interrelatedness, that mutual fruitful knowing, trusting and loving, which was the Creator's intention. We, my friends, at our best, are image bearers who steward and care for God's good world. At our worst, we dominate this world. We extract from this world. We take from this world. And it's interesting to me that even in Genesis chapter 2, if we didn't get the point in chapter 1, Genesis 2, here it is. The Lord God took the man, so Adam, and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and to keep it. What I want to do this morning is I want to make one big point and then some sub-points really quick. We're going to chase through these because I want you to have a foundation before we can talk about the radical politics of Jesus, right? This is all radical to me, by the way. I don't know if it is for you. But this is the thing. We have to have a biblical kind of foundation for talking about the way the world ought to be before we talk about the way we want the world to be through our own efforts. You follow? Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to note this, that humanity was created as part of God's Shalom project. That's the name of a book, by the way, by a guy named Bernhard Ott. If you want to check out a great little book on God's Shalom project. We were created on God's Shalom, as part of God's Shalom project. And so what are these relationships all about? There's 4 of them. Let me give this to you really quick. Number 1 is God. Human beings were designed in such a way that we had this intimate connection to the Creator. We are the looking after creature in God's good world. This is a different kind of connection than the lions get, than the tigers get, than the bears get. Oh my, like this is a different kind of thing, right? Like this is this intimacy that we can know God. And in case we didn't get the point, God becomes a human being and embodies what perfect image bearing looks like. His name is Jesus. If you want to know the script and where it's headed, it's human beings are good, they're beautiful, they mess up. So Jesus says, you don't have to mess up. Let me show you a better way to be human. And so the Christian life is all about saying, if I can follow this Jesus, I can know what it means to become more and more alive as a human being, because this is what God wanted in the first place. So God. The second one is others. The word Adam in Hebrew is actually a plural kind of word. Like there's this sense that there's this plurality of human beings even in the story and the way it's told itself. Now, this isn't to say that, Adam and Eve, as they're portrayed in the story, aren't also like autonomous characters. But there's this sense that the word for human and the word for Adam are similar, and there's these plays on words. What we get the idea is that at the end of it, Adam is like doing his thing, and God's like, being alone isn't a good idea. You need someone with you. And this, by the way, isn't a complementary partner. This is a co-equal partner in the story, in case you're wondering, that this woman and this man equally bear the image of God, equally have gifts to serve in this world. And it's not until something goes wrong that suddenly we start to see a trip in that script. But if we're Jesus people, we say, no, we don't live in Genesis chapter 3 where the story goes wrong. We actually live in Genesis 1 and 2 where the story is right. That's what it means to be a follower of the way of Jesus. And so, others. We're also in this pattern for creation. When you look at dirt, it should make you say, God is awesome, even if it's yucky dirt, right? Like when you look at trees, God is awesome. When I see squirrels, God is awesome. And then I start running because I'm kind of like a puppy, but that's a different problem. That's something I'm working on. So creation, we're designed to have relationship with creation. Here's the other one. We are designed to have an intimate relationship with ourselves. This is the one that in American culture we often do so poorly. And let me tell you what I think's at the heart of it. We have bought the lie that individualism is what it means to be a human being, that I should have my autonomous situation, my autonomous rights, and as I figure out my autonomy in this world, then I'll start doing nice things for other people, but it's rooted in my autonomy. Actually, in this web of relationships, you're never autonomous. You're connected to the dirt, you're connected to a God, and you're connected to other people. It's not autonomy. But knowing yourself is this, that there is a God in heaven who died on my behalf to liberate me from the shame and messiness of my story so that I can come back into those 4 relationships in the way that I was supposed to in the first place. That is what it means to know yourself. It means being the person, as Brene Brown would put it maybe, who dares greatly in the world, who puts your whole self in front of people and says, I don't care if I am putting myself at risk in front of you because I want my real person to rise up in this moment and be present, because that is the kind of God who is present with me, a fully vulnerable God. That's a beautiful storyline to be a part of. And so, Shalom becomes a way of describing this web of relationships in the story. And this is what we see throughout the Hebrew scriptures and then in Jesus, right? Like Jesus is risen from the dead and done all that cool stuff, which is pretty cool in John's gospel. And he walks into this room magically. It's kind of crazy. It's not because he's a ghost. It's because his physical body is better than the other physicality. Anyway, different story, different day. And he walks in and, well, here I am, and he says, what words? Shalom. And he breathes on them the Holy Spirit. For Jesus, resurrection and the power of God's Spirit means you can experience the wholeness of God once again in a way that has not been possible without these divine resources. And so, in God's Shalom Project, this is what Bernhard Ott says. This is great. And by the way, this is German translated into English, and I just love that. I love it when I'm, feeling like I'm multicultural, even though I'm not. This is, I'm German, I'm told. I don't know if that's true. But anyway, side note, Mennonites don't know what we are really. We're just kind of this mix of people that migrated. Okay, so here we go. Bernhard Ott says, when things are the way they are supposed to be in human life, Shalom exists. There is shalom when we can look God in the eye and know that there is no guilt or debt of sin against us. There is shalom when we as humans can look each other in the eye and ask, are you happy to see me? Or is there still something bad between us? And we can answer with a laugh, everything is right between us. In fact, shalom even means that we can look creation in the eye, God's good creation in which we live. The story of the Bible is at its heart the story of a God on a journey with humans on the way of shalom. That, my friends, is the big storyline. God desires those things to be true of us, be true of our community, be true of what informs our politics. So a couple of really important points, because we're going to point this to Jesus as we kind of back up the truck and kind of land somewhere. So first here, politics from a Jesus-shaped perspective always seeks shalom. It always does. It is not possible to be a political person in the way of Jesus and not be seeking shalom, wholeness, peace, restoration, healing, harmony, relationships of these sorts. This is the vocation. In fact, even in the Hebrew Scriptures, when they're in exile, this is what God tells the prophet Jeremiah to be about, even when they're in exile. And by the way, what a metaphor for us. We are exiles in the United States. Are we American? Most of us, yes. Does that inform my primary identity? Absolutely not. What informs my primary identity? Well, if I'm a follower of Jesus, it's my Jesus-ness that is supposed to be at the foundation. So I am a Christian who is in America, and I have a passport, so I'm an American, right? I'm an American Christian, right? This distinction is so important. And this is what Jeremiah says when they're in exile in Babylon. Seek the shalom, welfare, peace of the city where I have sent you into exile. That's their foundational posture. And by the way, that verse about, for I know the plans I have for you, right? God, that's in just a few verses later where God is saying to these people in exile, I know what's coming for you. I know what I long for you. And what I long for you to do is seek wholeness, seek peace, seek the shalom of the place in which you are planted. That is politics of Jesus 101. But here's the problem. Sin, and I'm going to give you a short definition, sin is the culpable disturbance of that shalom. The culpable disturbance of shalom is how I would define sin. This comes from a Christian philosopher. His name's Cornelius Pangea, Jr., and it's just brilliant. And there's a longer section on this. But when we decide that we can break relationship with God, when we can break relationship with others, when we can break relationship with the earth, we break relationship to who God is inviting us to be, that is sin. That is a biblical definition of sin. It is disturbing shalom, disrupting wholeness. It is not simply an arbitrary set of rules that you must follow. Some of these things are actually patterns put in place so that alienation, another word for sin, alienation, friction between parties doesn't have to be in the picture. And if it does emerge, there's ways to deal with it. Like leaving your gift at the altar and finding the person you've wronged, as Jesus would say, and saying, I need your forgiveness. This is what is often untalked about in politics. Politics is, at its best, it seeks to fix issues caused by sin. And I put fix in air quotes because we have to understand something. There has never been a Christian nation. They may call themselves Christian, but at the end of the day, there is no national structure, no governmental structure that has ever been Christian in the way of Jesus that doesn't involve some sort of alienation somewhere in the pyramid or the cycle or whatever. This is just the way it is. So at its best, politics is trying to fix some of the issues that are caused by the disruption of those relationships, which we would call shalom disrupted. But at its worst, politics at its worst reinforces the alienation caused by sin. So at its worst, we set up systems and we say, well, this is going to make me feel really good, but the person on the other side of town isn't going to feel good because it's alienating that person from me, right? Like, this is what politics often does. And yet, here's the weirdest thing about America. We have this story in our heads that politics and faith are supposed to be like this all the time. And yet, at its best, we're only fixing things, and at its worst, which is more often, we're actually creating more alienation, even though we think we're doing the thing that's going to fix things. You follow? Because sin is always in systems that aren't led by the right king. Yeah. Sin is always in systems that are not led by the right king. And so we have to ask ourselves, where is my place in this system? Do I identify with this color or that color or a blend of colors or no color at all? Or, these are all the challenges of being political people in our world. And think about the disruption of relationship that you've had in the last 6 months. How many of you are tired of the internet and politics? Anyone? Someone? It's okay if you're not. How many of you are entertained by it? Like, it's just the funniest thing ever to watch these people go crazy. I'm one of them. It's hilarious sometimes. I feel bad afterwards and guilty, and then I go pray and on my knees, and I walk on my knees on gravel to feel really bad. But anyway, that's my own spiritual discipline, and I invite you to really lean into no, don't. But the problem is we give away our allegiance to the possibility that we might fix things. And Jesus is trapped in this, and this is where we're going to land this morning. Jesus gets trapped in this kind of dichotomy that I'm political and my religion is over here, and I'm going to be political and I'm going to be religious, but I don't have to do them at the same time, but I'm going to say that my religious values are always shaping my political, right? And we kind of do this weird dance where we try and justify our position as the right position, but we're really siloed off as human beings when we do this a lot of the time. And so Jesus is approached in Luke chapter 20, and he's given this no-win scenario. Check this out. It's so good. Chapter 20, verse 20. It says, the legal experts and their chief priests were watching Jesus closely and sent spies to pretend to be sincere. They wanted to trap him in his words so they could hand him over to the jurisdiction and authority of the governor. They asked him, "Teacher, we know that you are correct in what you say and teach. You don't show favoritism, but teach God's way as it really is." Okay, so come on. Are they really thinking that? No. Come on. These are a bunch of manipulative people. These are good never mind. Does the law allow people to pay taxes to Caesar or not? So the Torah, are we allowed to, as people who are shaped by the God of Israel, are we allowed to pay taxes? What do we do here, Jesus? Give us a clue, and let us trap you, because they're trying to kill him, right? So that's, what a great story. So 23, since Jesus recognized their deception, he said to them, "Show me a coin. Whose image and inscription does it have on it?" "Well, Caesar's," they replied. He said to them, "Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God." They couldn't trap him in his words in front of the people. Astonished by his answer, they were speechless. I wish sometimes I had that much creativity on the spot to just leave people speechless when they're trying to trap me in some political thing, right? Like this is brilliant. And interestingly, if you read the passage, it says, whose inscription and image is on the coin? Well, it's Caesar's. Give to God what is God's. He doesn't really define what is God's, but we're left wondering in a Jewish context where shalom is the goal, right? Where it's supposed to be about the right relationships. And Jesus says, give to God what is God. What is God's? In American politics, this means, well, I'm going to be my political self, and then I'm going to be my Jesus self, and they're not going to always intermingle because we have the separation of church and state, just like we have the separation of church and state in our hearts, and that's okay because we're good Americans that way. But Jesus doesn't say that. It just makes us feel good about our political choices when we read it that way. Jesus is so subversive here. It blows my mind. What Jesus is saying is, if you see the coin with Caesar's image on it, you know where it goes. But here's the deal. What exactly belongs to God but you? the one who bears the image of that God. Go and be that image bearer. And never mind the fact that you shouldn't be carrying the image of anyone in your pocket because that's anti-Jewish, but that's, we'll give you that. Go be the image bearer of God. Jesus cuts through the noise and says, Caesar's image is about alienation, but God's image is about shalom. And the question as we move into this series is, are we going to be people who lean into the alienation, lean into the polarization, lean into the things that cause the disruption of shalom? Or are we going to lean into the way of Jesus, the way of peace, the way of justice, the way of wholeness? And that doesn't mean, therefore don't vote, therefore don't get involved, therefore you can't have political opinions. It simply means that there is a way of life that trumps all of those things. It is the way of discipleship. It is the way of Jesus. It is a way that says the King of the universe is for the shalom of all creation, the shalom of all people. And recognizing the question, where am I putting my hope in all of this? Only the politics of Jesus, often called the kingdom of God, can heal alienation and restore the four relationships of shalom. I wonder this morning, if you came in this morning with the heaviness of this next political season. I wonder this morning if as you process what it means to be a Jesus person who cares about shalom making, if you're worried about who's going to win this thing. And look, I have my opinions about who I think shouldn't win. I understand, I get where some of you might be coming from. And I'm not saying that's all bad. But the question at the end of the day is, are we kingdom people or are we politics of America people? If we can answer that question faithfully, then we will know how to proceed in a political world. But if we can't answer that question, that fundamental question, everything we do will feel like it's supposed to be about others, but it really is going to have alienation ingrained in it because the systems of Caesar are always built on alienation somewhere. It doesn't matter where it starts. So this morning, I want to pray for us. I want to pray that God would give us an imagination for what it means to be radical political revolutionaries in a world that says we can only be this or that.